with us, James Braha, once again on Popular Demand. James, a warm welcome to you.
Thank you.
So, been reading on Facebook about your Braha Sutras. Before we move ahead with our topic of the day, so far, what have you written on Braha Sutras and how have they, panning out?
Oh, I didn't know you were going to ask me this. So originally, this is a book that I'm working on. This will not be out, till next year. Originally, I was going to take all the material that I had done in Sedona. I spent a year working on what I felt people should know that took me 40 years. I was going to put that all in a book. It was going to be called 300 Point Vedic Astrology 300 Points or Vedic Astrology 500 Points. And then I had a student that I was teaching online. I was giving him sessions. And I said, "Are you getting anything out of this?" And he said, "Are you kidding? I have a whole file of important notes that you've taught me." And I put them in a file called the Braha Sutras. and I couldn't stop laughing. And he loved the title. And so suddenly I thought, could I actually call it the Braha Sutras? And so as soon as I changed from the 500 points to the Braha Sutras, suddenly it freed me up to talk about anything and everything that I've learned in the last years. For example, some of the things in there, I mean, it's going to be 95% astrology, of course, but some of the things are not. Like one of them is that for a relationship to work, it needs to have compatibility in 4 areas: emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual. Everybody's relationship will be different. Some will be more spiritual, some will be more physical, some will be more mental. But if one of those is lacking, you're going to have troubles. So this has nothing to do with astrology. You're not going to look in the horoscope to find that, but this is something worth knowing. Yeah. And then Kali Yuga. Not everybody that reads my books knows about Kali Yuga. Many of them are Westerners. So there's just a little thing about Kali Yuga. So that's that. But I have been sending some of the sutras. I've been sending some of the sutras to friends, and I got a response this morning that said, "Oh my God, this is so valuable because I've spent the first 65 sutras talking more about what the astrology session is about and how you need to have, for example, you need to have an understanding of what is the best use of astrology." But it's going to go all over the place. I was writing the other day how one of the easiest ways to get something wrong is to ignore the karaka. Now, everybody knows that if Venus is afflicted, there's going to be love problems, even if the 7th house is good and the Navamsha is good. Venus is the karaka. It can ruin marriage. But I'll forget. Like somebody will have a terrible 5th house, no aspects to the 5th. The 5th house ruler is afflicted, and they'll have some great experience with children. And I look at the chart and say, how is this possible? And suddenly I see Jupiter exalted and aspected by Venus. Just the karaka alone can be powerful enough. If it's powerful enough or afflicted enough, it affects. So these are the things, they're subtleties.
So we'll keep asking you about your books. So we get beautiful traits, one or the other, and definitely we're going to read the book. But these are the traits that we really do. They leave a very beautiful, thought, and you can always connect to it. It's timeless. And James has been talking to us and has been telling us that we need to see the outer planets in Vedic astrology. We need to expand our horizons literally and figuratively. And so James is here to give us a beautiful explanation on yet another planet. Yes, James, the field is all yours.
So I believe we spoke about Pluto aspects with other planets.
Right.
But we didn't talk about Pluto through the houses. And then also we can talk about Neptune. But first, let's finish with Pluto.
Right.
So Pluto, as I mentioned in the other session, Pluto represents death and rebirth. Death and rebirth. And it often causes emotional tumultuousness and intensity. It's a malefic. All the outer planets are malefics. But it can cause tremendous upheaval. And then you feel like you're dying, but then there's a growth that occurs as well. Also, I want to mention that Pluto is considered the higher octave of Mars, because you have Mars ruling Scorpio, and now you have Pluto ruling Scorpio. However, Isabel Hickey, which was my first teacher, used to say that Pluto is actually a higher octave of the moon. And it may be both, it may be both. But where she is getting that, well, I mean, I shouldn't say where she was getting that, I don't know. But you can see, I'm not saying that Pluto is not a higher octave of Mars. It is. When Pluto was discovered, we had nuclear power, the atom bomb. We had the mafia get very big, and dictators. So that is Pluto as a higher octave of Mars. However, if you find people that have a very strong Pluto, you will find that there's a tremendous emotional sensitivity that makes them have these extreme reactions. Because when they hurt very, very deeply. It's very emotional. It causes upheaval. So you should consider that, okay? So whenever Pluto is in any house, there's going to be tremendous sensitivity, often tremendous upheaval. Now, if Pluto is well aspected, if it's near Jupiter or Venus or opposite Jupiter, Venus, something like that, then it's possible that Pluto may be more on the positive side. But in general, wherever Pluto is, the person feels tremendously vulnerable. So Pluto creates this tremendous vulnerability and sensitivity, and it's a malefic. So wherever Pluto is, whatever house it's in the chart, the person is likely to have intense emotional experiences during their childhood that are difficult, painful, upheaval. But you have to understand that it creates tremendous growth. They grow because we suffer because of physical pain or attachment to desire with attachment. Pluto is the most intense desire. It's like Scorpio, okay? So wherever Pluto is, the desires are very strong. If it's in the house of the mother, the desires with the mother are very strong, and then you suffer because you don't get everything you want. If Pluto is in the 11th house, you may suffer on account of friends because you have strong desires about them. So it's death and it's rebirth, but it's also power. It's also power. Pluto, if anybody knows tarot, there is the card of the Fool. There's 78 cards, there's 22 majors. The Fool is either 0 or 22, okay? The Fool is either completely foolish or very wise. Pluto is similar. It creates intense power. So let's as well as the troubles. Okay, so Pluto in the first house. Now, whenever you talk about any planet in the first house, you have to talk about whether it's close to the ascendant. The closer it gets to the ascendant, the more intense that planet will be. But Pluto in the house of the personality makes the person enormously sensitive to criticism. And you can guarantee criticism will be coming. I don't mean criticism as much as I mean feedback. In other words, the person with Pluto in the first house has probably, we don't want to get too definitive, probably the person has misused their personality. So Pluto is now in the house of the personality. So they go through life and people, oh, you know, you're being too aggressive. You know, you're being too sensitive. You know, you're being too generous. They'll just keep giving you feedback.
And you are not open to those feedbacks. With Pluto, you're not open to those feedbacks.
Well, you have no choice.
Right.
Nobody, it's not that the person's not open to it. It's that the human condition, everybody, nobody particularly wants feedback. They don't go around saying, tell me how I'm doing, tell me how I'm doing. Unless you're going to say you're doing great. They don't want to hear it. But the personality has been misused. So they need to learn to be balanced. So Pluto winds up in the first house, and then people are constantly giving feedback. And so I tell the clients, I say, look, people are going to always give you feedback. Don't be defensive about it, because you're never going to be able to stop it. You can't stop the planets. They're going to give you feedback. Do the best you can. Thank you for that. I'll consider it, etc. Now, the person's enormously sensitive, but Pluto is also intense. It's the planet of nuclear power, dictators, mafia. It's powerful. So the person with Pluto in the first house is very sensitive, but they can also be extremely intense and powerful. And Pluto is, all three of the outer planets are spiritual. Neptune is sensitive spiritual. Uranus is flashes of intuition. Pluto is the ability to care for people and heal them. So if you think of Pluto as the higher octave of the moon, you're going to find Pluto people very good at healing. You're going to find Pluto, and if a person's got Pluto in the first house, they are a Pluto person, more than Pluto in the third or fourth or fifth. So the Pluto person's trying to heal the world. Like if Pluto transits the 10th house, that's when a person decides they want to change their career to do something more helpful and more healing. So the Pluto person can be very enormously sensitive, but they can also be very intense and powerful. And a Pluto person is always a survivor. They can survive anything. But the death and rebirth is on the personality level. Hey, you're too sensitive, ouch. And then you grow. Hey, you're too assertive, ouch. And then you grow. Like that. Pluto in the second house, the house of money. You'll see a lot of millionaires with Pluto in the second house, even though it's a great malefic. So the Pluto in the second house is going to affect money matters. It's possible that there could be problems with money and poverty and stuff like that. But what I would say, one of the things about Pluto is that it's compulsive. You know, Pluto alone is like having Venus conjunct Mars somewhere. It creates this intensity. So the person is likely to be very intense about money. They are likely to have a strong desire and commitment to make a lot of money. So that's when I see Pluto in the second, wherever Pluto is, there's a compulsion. So the compulsion on the personality level, the compulsion, if it's in the seventh house, they're compulsive about relationships. So the second house is going to be a compulsion about money. There's an odd thing about the second house. And by the way, much of what I'm saying is coming from the Western side, sort of, because you don't really use the planets, you don't read them in the Hindu books. But if you read in the Western books, you're going to find there, which is a more psychological system, they're going to say the second house is value, it's money, it's value. Okay. And that translates into self-value. Yeah. How much you value yourself, how much you charge for your work, etc., etc., etc. So Pluto in the second house sometimes can be devastating to the person's sense of worth. But that's where they will learn and that's where they will grow. But generally, I see Pluto in the second house more where there's a compulsion to make money. It's very, very important. It's not like, well, I'll do this business, I'll be an astrologer, so if it doesn't make money, it's not a big deal. No, that's not right. If Pluto's in the second house, they're going to want to, make money. It's going to be
good money.
Big money.
So there is this one question that I'd like to ask you here, James, is that, as you correctly put in, that the second house is the house of value, how you value your own self. So there are many ways then where we can evaluate or value ourselves. They can be family, it could be education, it could be learning, it could be the moral fiber. So would we consider Pluto's association with any one of these things also, or just money?
I would stick to money and how I value myself. That's just, you know, some people, they don't value themselves when Pluto is in the second house. They also could overvalue themselves. But it's all about, it's about possessions. It's about material. The other thing is that the second house, we talk about it as money, but it's not, it's the material universe. The second house is the opposite of the eighth house. The eighth house is Scorpio, and it's metaphysical and it's spiritual. The second house is as physical, it's material, it's art, beauty, collectibles. It's
Yes.
everything that makes the physical universe
Function. Yes.
materialistic. Yeah, so it's a very materialistic feature, you know.
So yeah, so I get your point there. Okay, so it is about getting things on a very material basis, and that primarily with the second house, it's the wealth factor that we're talking
yes,
about.
it's the wealth factor.
Big money.
Big money.
Right. And just before we move ahead, James, how many years does it take for Pluto to transit a sign?
This is, you know, I don't know all the way around the sun, but I can tell you this. It can go through a house for 15 years. It can go through a house for 40 years. It's very erratic.
Right. That shows its erratism. A
person will only have the transits of Pluto in maybe 6 houses. Nobody has Pluto through 12 houses, not even 10. They have 6, 5, 6, 7, that's it. Pluto is in, you know, I don't know which house is it. Pluto is that.
Move on to the third house.
I believe it's in my 9th house, and it started in my 4th. Okay, I'm 69. It's 5 houses. That's it. So when Pluto enters, let me go back a little bit. When Pluto enters the first house, suddenly the person has a big experience of their own power. Pluto hits the first house cusp. It's like an earthquake or a volcano, and a lot of energy comes out, and they start to use their power in the first house transit. When Pluto goes into the second house, I tell a person, if you're ever going to go after money, this is the time for it, because Pluto's going to go in that house. Now money's going to become very important. Pluto in the third house, first of all, can be very upsetting with relatives. Not just brothers and sisters, but relatives at large. There can be a lot of intensity. Now, what I'm about to say is going to be a little bit complex. In the Western system, the third house is writing, teaching, and communications. There's no doubt. In the Hindu, I see teachers and writers from the second house.
Right.
But Pluto in the third house, natally, that person's going to have an intense desire for communication and writing. That's when they're going to have the strongest desires to be writing and self-expression. And remember, this will go on 15 years or 25 or 30 years, depending upon, you have to get the ephemeris to look and see. So Pluto in the third house is about brothers and sisters and relatives, and that's not going to be easy. Pluto in the third house is likely to be upheaval with the brothers and sisters. It's likely to be upheaval with the relatives. You would be more sensitive, more emotional with them. I tend to focus a little bit more on the person's going to really, it's a spiritual planet. So the Pluto in the third house is going to make them more open to spiritual realities, mental communication. The mind is more open to you know, spiritual realities, and the desire to communicate and write and express is going to be off the charts.
So one thing here I'd like to ask you is that, as you said, that these people are going to be sensitive towards the brothers and relatives in general. And rightly at the beginning, you had said that that Pluto as a planet gives you an ability that you will be hurt and then you will learn. So
right.
There is a chance of getting hurt by these relatives, by these siblings, and then learning, taking your lessons from there. Spiritual growth is also a possibility here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, never forget this, wherever Pluto is, you're going to suffer. It's almost certain. Maybe Pluto could be in its own sign. Maybe it could be well aspected, but Pluto is when you're most sensitive. The higher octave of the moon, you're so sensitive. And so when things happen, it hurts, but then there is growth. But there's always, you know, when you're 3 years old and 4 years old and 5 years old, you don't have any ability to grow and think, and you just have the pain. You just have, so wherever Pluto is, there is a lack of control. There's a lack of control. And then eventually you start to learn how to gain control. And the way you gain control is paradoxically by letting go of the desires. For example, I have just a Scorpio 7th house, just a Scorpio 7th house. And in my first marriage, the attachments that were emotionally attached to my wife, she should be a certain way, she should not be the other way. These things were so intense. Then the marriage broke up. It was enormously painful, but enormous growth. And after that, I said, stop trying to control how the spouse is. That's where the power comes. So it's like that.
Right. That's and as you said, Pluto was in your fourth house at the time of your birth, so it's squaring with the seventh house also. So that's again a place where learnings become so very strong. Don't you think so?
So Pluto in the fourth house. I have Pluto in the fourth house.
Right.
So Pluto in the fourth house, you will have no control over your mother. And it's not just that you have no control. Everybody could say they have no control of another person, but there will be things that will happen with your mother that will be enormously painful. And then you suffer, and then you learn how to let go, and you learn, you learn how to deal with it. But Pluto in the fourth house, so Pluto in the fourth house makes you very, very sensitive with the mother. The mother may also be Plutonian, which Pluto's a malefic. So Pluto, in the same way that with Pluto in the third house, you could have a brother or a sister, the domineering, manipulative, dictatorial. Pluto can be a dictator, and you may have Pluto in the third, and you may have a sibling that is like a dictator. They boss you, they manipulate you. Say Pluto in the fourth house can mean the mother is like that. The mother can be pushy, intense, smothering. Or the mother could be crazy. The mother could have all kinds of, some sort of problem such that you are affected, you have no control over it, and it occurs in that area. Now also, with Pluto in the fourth house, if the chart is geared toward Pluto in the fourth house, the mother may be domineering, pushy, smothering, manipulative. Those are all Pluto qualities, and the mother could be that way. And you could have an enormous sensitivity to the mother. You will not have control of the mother. But this also means that the fourth house is land and real estate. And so if you have Pluto in the fourth house, the tendency to want to go underneath the land, to look for oil or hidden treasures or things like that. But the tendency to have mansions, to have a big mansion, because Pluto is so intense. And the tendency to want to, like, I have a house, it was, I don't know, 1,300 square feet. And we expanded it. You know, I said, oh, let's get a permit and we'll build here and build there. And, you know, so like, for example, when Pluto enters the fourth house in a trans with the mother, and if the mother's very old, Pluto entering the fourth house is not going to be so good. In that first year, you have to keep your eye on your mother to see if her health is going to be okay, because Pluto, this great malefic, has hit the fourth house. When Pluto hits the third house, you may have something with a brother or sister where they can die, or they can have some big experience. This is Pluto through the third. Pluto through the fourth does with land, homes, real estate. It does with mother. It has these intense things. And when Pluto goes into the fourth house, this is a more Western interpretation, but it's worth hearing. The fourth house in the Western is the ancestors. It's your home. It's your home, and therefore it's your ancestors. And so when a planet like Uranus or Pluto goes into the fourth house, if it's Pluto going into the fourth house, one of the things that I tell people is now you have to look for the best place to live. Like when Pluto gets in the fourth, they think, wait a minute, where should I be living? Not where should I move or something, but wait a minute, what would be the greatest place for me to have the greatest experience? So that's when you get serious about finding the spot that's perfect for you. Okay. But
so that has to
being
be
that the
that.
fourth house,
Sorry, so that has to be on a spiritual level. You're kind of moved to find a good place for your own self.
no, not so much spiritual level.
Okay.
Material. Like
Okay.
the second house is money. I want money. Pluto hits the fourth house. I got to find the best place to live. This is purely, yeah.
Okay.
There may be some spiritual overtones to it. I don't know. But I'm just saying this is very, very simplistic. Pluto hits the fourth. I got to find where to live. Just like that. But what is a little bit more spiritual or psychological is that because the fourth house is the home and the ancestors, when a planet like Pluto or Uranus goes into the fourth house, there's an experience that the person begins to have, and I usually alert them to it, but they begin to start analyzing their life in terms of what their parents and their ancestors gave them. So you're living your life and you know you like this and you like that, and you believe this is good and this is bad. A big heavy planet goes into that fourth house, and suddenly you go, wait a minute, my parents and my ancestors told me this is the right way to do it. This is the right way to be. What do I feel about it? So that fourth house influence brings that up. But I mean, really, mainly Pluto in the fourth is about these. The thing is, Pluto is more the planet of death than anything.
Yes.
In the Hindu, we talk about Mars, but Pluto is the planet ruling Scorpio. It's the planet of death. Pluto in the fourth house, your mother may have died early. Pluto in the third house, you may have had a sibling that died. You don't want to say that to every single person, but you watch when Pluto hits one of those houses, somebody might die, or having it there natally. You didn't have control over your mother. You know, I was writing in the Raha Sutras just this morning about how there's this phrase that I use where suddenly it feels like there's no ground underneath you.
Feet.
So wherever Pluto is, there's no ground underneath you. So you're looking for the mother, and it's like you can't get a hold of it. Something is missing, like that. Yeah. All right. So Pluto in the fifth house has to do with compulsion to creativity. Now, in the Western, the fifth is the arts. In the Hindu, the third is specifically music, dance, and drama. The fifth is art in general because it's the mind. So there's a difference. The third house in the Hindu makes a person energetic, alive, self-expression. They love the arts. The fifth house, it's in the mind. And with Pluto in the fifth, it's a compulsion. You have no choice but to keep creating and creating. Look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. Because the fifth house is the house of Leo, which is
the king.
Yeah. So Pluto in the fifth house, these people are compulsive about creativity. Now, they may have a famous child. They may have a child who dies. Depends on what's going on with the rest of the horoscope and how Pluto is aspected. But Pluto is always a planet of death. So you have to consider that. You don't make it, 80% of people are going to have someone die. But that is, it's either going to be a physical death or it's going to be an emotional death. There's no two ways about it. So it's an emotional death with the children or it's a physical death. There's always something like that. So when Pluto enters the fifth house, I tell the people, your relationship with your children is now going to get very intense. There's going to be a lot more intensity with children. If the person, a lot of times I'll see a person later in life, the chart's artistic, but they're not an artist. Pluto's going into the fifth house. I say now is the time to go toward the arts. Okay. Pluto was I going to say? Something about Pluto in the fifth house, children, investments, and speculations.
Investments and speculation. So that brings me to a question. Do you think that investments and speculations is something that a person should indulge in when you have Pluto in the fifth house?
There's going to be there's going to be a compulsion to gamble. There's going to be a compulsion to speculate. But remember, you're going to have death and rebirth experiences there. So I would say, unless, you know, in order to be using Pluto for investments, you better have some other good aspects for those investments and speculations. Oh, I know what I couldn't remember. It was love affairs.
Yes.
Fifth house is love affairs, not marriage, but love affairs. So in India, it may be different. In this country, people have love affairs, then they get married, but they have love affairs that are not marriage. So when Pluto goes into the fifth house, that is going to make love affairs more intense. That's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. Of course, you don't want to do that if you're married. I don't mean that, but if there's been a dry spell with love affairs and Pluto enters that fifth house, you can expect something. You can expect some love affairs.
So can I ask you a question here, James? You also said one beautiful thing, that it is also the death of something. So, you know, could it, if somebody who's going to who is in a very intense love affair, when Pluto is entering your fifth house, should you be also careful about the fact that it could be a death of the fifth relation?
I don't, not so much. I don't think. I mean, I'm sure that there's cases like that, but I would be much more concerned when it goes into the fourth house or the 10th house, the mother or father, if they're older.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Now, let's say that there's some love affair that you're, let's say that you're having some affair with some lover and they're in very bad health or there's some problem. Then if it enters the fifth house, maybe.
No, I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about the physical death of the person. As you said,
Oh.
there can be emotional death also. So what I'm talking is, could that intense affair that has been going on for such a long time, and
Yes.
suddenly when Pluto is hitting the fifth house, could
Yes,
there be an emotional
absolutely. Yes, absolutely. It could be the death of it. Pluto is death and rebirth. It's change. When Pluto enters a house, I tell the person, this is never going to be the same again. When Pluto goes into your second house, you're going to have 10, 15 years, or could be 20 or 30 years. Your financial situation is going to be radically altered when Pluto goes in there. Not karmically. It's not like it happens and then all of a sudden the finances change. Pluto goes into the second house and suddenly you think, I have to make money. Pluto goes into the fourth house. I have to have a farm. I've always wanted a farm. You see what I mean? It's when it goes in, suddenly the energy becomes very intense. So Pluto going into the fifth house, if you're in a love affair that's something's wrong with it, Pluto will knock the heck out of that.
Exactly. That's
and the love affairs that occur in those years, they won't be like the love affairs that were before it. They'll be much more intense, more emotional.
So as you move towards the sixth house, Pluto in the sixth house.
When Pluto goes into the sixth house, you're going to work hard. So I was working and writing my books. And when Pluto left the sixth house, I don't know, I'd been there 10 or 15 years. As soon as it left, I thought, my God, my whole life has been work. This is insane. Why was I working so hard? Really, seriously. I said, my life was all about work. And it's not like I was 60 and it ended. I was like 40 or 45 or something. As soon as it ended, I said, wait a minute. I don't have to work that hard. There's other areas of life. So when Pluto goes in, you're looking at health. When Pluto goes in, you are then going to have the greatest learning about health and healing matters. You're going to want to go deep into health and healing. If you have problems physically, Pluto going into the sixth house is not going to help it. If you have physical problems, Pluto goes in there and then they get intense and they get worse, etc. Now, that's when you can deal with them and heal them, etc. But Pluto going into the sixth house is not going to help the health. When
What if it
Pluto,
already is at the time of your birth? What if it already is in?
yeah, okay, good point. So when Pluto is in the sixth house, there is already a compulsion to self-improvement. Pluto is death and rebirth. It's in the house of health. You will be born with some kind of physical health issues that cause you to focus on health and healing. Um, it'll either be that you want to heal other people. Pluto is a healing planet to begin with, as I said. When Pluto goes into, it's like the higher octave of the moon. It's also higher of Mars, but it's also the moon. So it's like the moon in the sixth house on steroids. You really want to heal people. Now, if you don't want to be physically healing, you could have a hotel or a motel, or you could be cooking for people or have a restaurant. But there's going to be a very strong caring for people, and there's going to be a very strong element on health and healing. There could also be some big enemies and jealous people and competitors. That's a possibility. Okay. But when Pluto enters that sixth house, you're gonna work hard as heck for a long time, and self-improvement's really gonna be important if it's there natally or if it moves into that sixth house. That's basically it. But there could be some experiences with maids and servants. If you're in a job and you're not crazy about the bosses or the co-workers, you're not gonna like it when Pluto goes in. And Pluto in the sixth house natally could be a situation where your whole life there's trouble in the workplace, trouble with bosses, trouble with coworkers. There could be. So so you've got a whole horoscope, and you've got the Hindu horoscope, sixth house ruler, planets aspecting the sixth in the. So it's like, especially, when I started astrology, it was Western astrology in the 70s, and Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, they were the most fascinating. They weren't an afterthought. There was the sun, the moon, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. They were the most fascinating to begin with. But when you are starting, you've studied astrology for years, and suddenly you find out about these, you want to look at them in terms of, if you see Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in one particular house, look at how it relates to the chart. So let's say that Pluto is in, let's say that the 10th house is quite strong in the Hindu horoscope, very, very strong. Then you see Pluto in the 10th house. That Pluto in the 10th house isn't going to mean, oh, sudden death and rebirth, all these deaths of career. No, that's going to mean that Pluto is going to be powerful and bring fame. I see this all the time. The second house is really strong. Pluto's in the second house. That's going to be big money. Whereas if the second house was bad, weak, and then you have Pluto in the second house, then you could have poverty and big problems.
So what you're saying is that it inflates what is good, and it also inflates what is bad. So
I'm saying something like that. The thing is, it wasn't like that for me because I learned all the planets at once. But since the viewers probably haven't looked at Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, the way they're going to learn is by looking at a house where Pluto is, seeing how that house is in the natal Hindu horoscope. And then if it's really good and Pluto is there, it's fantastic. If it's really bad and Pluto is there, it's horrible. It's like that. Pluto is intense.
Yes, that's one word we need to remember about Pluto all the time: intense. That's it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So when I was studying Western astrology, there was this thing called the astrodynes, and they would analyze the most powerful planet and the weakest. Pluto was my strongest planet because it's in the fourth house and it aspects everything. And I asked my son when he was about 7 or 8, how would you describe your dad? He said, intense. And I said, that's the Pluto.
Okay, so, and it's also in your fourth house of emotions. So probably that is why they're very intense. Whenever you're projecting them, so as you said, one word that works with you is intense. Yeah. So as we move on to the seventh,
I've had people ask me, on occasion, if I'm a Scorpio. I go, Scorpio. It's just because they're seeing the Pluto. It's Pluto aspects my sun, my Mercury, my Neptune, my moon. It's angular. It's just very prominent. Anyway, 7th house. If you see Pluto in the 7th house and the person is 25 or 30, the most intense growth in their life comes from relationship. Generally, the most growth a person's ever going to have is where there's the most pain and suffering, and it comes from Pluto. So I grew from having a mother that was extremely difficult and sick and ill, and it was painful, but you have to grow. You have no choice because so Pluto in the 7th, you know what the person's relationships are like. They are never lighthearted, and there's always extreme pain. There's always extreme pain if they have Pluto in the 7th house in relationship. It's going to be whatever house it's in, there's going to be pain. So there will be a lot of tumultuousness. That's what you're going to have a lot of tumultuous, a lot of ups and downs, and you have to expect to have this death and rebirth in relationships. So you have a big fight and it goes on for 3 days and then it's over. And then you feel like it's a new relationship. And that goes on for 20 or 30 years. On the other hand, it can be a famous partner. So if you have a very strong 7th house in the natal chart in the Hindu, and then you see Pluto there, that can easily be a very powerful, famous, significant spouse. Don't discount that it could be a spouse dying, because it is one of the possibilities. When Pluto enters the 7th house, if the person is not married, I tell them in the next year or two, you're going to have some very deep, they're not going to be the same kind of relationships. They're going to be deep, they're going to be intense, and Pluto's going to stay there 10, 20 years. So it's not going away. And I tell them, whatever relationship you're having is probably not going to be the same again. When Pluto gets in there, it's going to change. Not radical change, but it could be radical change. If there's indications of a bad marriage, the people are not happy, and Pluto goes in, they should let it go, because it'll just get worse if it's a bad one. Now, when Pluto goes in there, that would be a perfect time to go for therapy, for counseling, because Pluto's going to put a lot of intensity in that area. It's not going to be the same. So if it was a problem and Pluto gets in there, one of the people is going to say, look, I can't live like this anymore. Either we fix this or we get the hell out. That's Pluto.
Incidentally, James, just to let you know that you're so correct, I was just checking the transit chart, and I see that Pluto is in Capricorn now. And recalling about some Cancer native that I know the spouse just put in his or her word and says that we need to work on it before we can it cannot be unidirectional. It has to work both ways. So we need to work on it. And so, yes.
Yep. So. Pluto in the 8th house. Oof. This is the intense planet of death and rebirth in the house of death and rebirth. So if a person has Pluto in the 8th house, the first thing is they're going to be consumed with metaphysical realities, death and rebirth, astral travel, spiritual. They are going to have a lifetime of a lot of psychological and emotional self-improvement. They will be very, very sensitive. They'll be extremely sensitive. And there's likely to be a very, very intense desire to let go of attachments, to get rid of the suffering. So it's actually a very good placement for that. But it's not a very easy placement, because the desires are so intense and so powerful. And there will be attachments. There will be emotional attachments, and the whole life will be about, why is the suffering so intense when there's suffering? It doesn't mean they have a life of suffering. it means that when there's pain, when there's attachment, they have to do something because it's too painful. When a person has Uranus or Pluto going into the 8th house as a transit, I always warn them. I say, now look, for the next years, whenever there is some suffering, and when one of these planets goes in there, you're going to feel it, because what will happen is they will start to suffer because of some attachment. I want my child to act this way and not that way. I want this person to do this. I want money. I want whatever the desire is. It's going to be much more intense when they can't realize it. And so it's really a great, see that, like, if it's a transit, I say this is the time to go for therapy for anything that causes a lot of suffering that you can't let go of on your own. If you can't let go of it on your own, you're going to suffer. So go get some counseling, find out why you can't let go. But for the person that has it natally, they're in a process the whole life, letting go, letting go, letting go, letting go, letting go. It's just a lifelong process of self-improvement. And it's very spiritual. It's very metaphysical. And of course, when Pluto enters the 8th house, there could be a death. They could experience more funerals. There could be some death, but you don't predict death. You're going to die from this. But death and rebirth is going to be on their mind. They may go to more funerals.
Can we say transformations? Can we say transformations?
Yeah, you mean instead of death?
Yes, instead of death. Can I say that there's going to be a very, very big transformation in your life, wherein you
Yes.
would not be able to recognize after 10 years or after 15 years, you would not be able to recognize that person from where you came from?
Constant. It's constant. It's every day, every day, every day. There is self-improvement and transformation. Letting go of something, letting go of something. The desires are very strong, but there's letting go. Yeah, it's very spiritual placement. But it can also be that when if Pluto is there natally, this person might be going to get a huge inheritance. They're set up for inheritance.
Okay.
It's possible. When Pluto enters the 8th house, it could be a huge inheritance. And when Pluto enters the 8th house, that's going to affect if somebody's getting alimony or they're about to have a divorce. When Pluto enters that 8th house, it's going to have some kind of effect on how the money is divided up. Okay. And Pluto in the 8th house can be extreme sexual experiences. It can be extreme, intense sexuality, much deeper, much more intense than most people. And when Pluto enters that 8th house, they may suddenly begin to have more experimental sexual experiences or deeper, more intense. It's all those things.
Okay. So as it moves into somebody's 9th house, does it bring in a lot of higher learnings and more of open to reading religious texts of others' cultures, also understanding other cultures, or being more logical and just? Does it open up those avenues?
It's exactly what it does. It's every time I see, when I see Pluto transiting a house, right, I get excited. Ooh, look, Pluto's going to go into your 5th house now. Well, because, if you're doing a reading, you want to give them something that's big and intense, right? So Pluto, because it moves so slowly, when it goes into the 5th house, wow, now the arts, now creativity. Pluto in the 1st house, now you're going to start to be powerful and you're going to be powerful and you're going to exert your energy. It's big, right? When Pluto's going to the 9th house, I always feel a little disappointed. Only because it's usually not so intense. So in other words, Pluto's going into your 9th house. So now you can travel for the next 16 years. Now you can go visit gurus for the next, sorry, not 16 years, whatever it is. Pluto going through the 9th, it could be. But now you're going to have a lot more travel, interest in religion and philosophy and stuff like that. It's just not as, it's very easy. It's very nice. It's very benign. Pluto, I think that's the one house where I just don't expect anything negative. It's possible there could be. Maybe they have some big blowout with a guru. That's possible. Pluto in the 9th house to start out with, most of the times you're going to see that in the chart of spiritual seekers. I mean, if Pluto's in the ninth house, there's something about the ninth house and Pluto to me that seem to fit better than Pluto with other houses. And it makes it so that it's less difficult, less painful, less problematic.
Yes. Okay. So here, what you're saying is that Pluto and ninth house are extremely compatible. Nothing extraordinary out of the way happening.
I could be wrong about that, but I haven't seen Pluto go into, you're doing astrology and you're doing the reading and somebody says, oh, I just had this terrible experience. And you look and say, Pluto just changed house. And that's what they're talking about. I don't think I've ever had somebody say, I just had to leave my guru, Pluto entered the ninth. I just don't see it. I never see that, but I could be wrong, but
Right.
Pluto in the ninth to me, natally means the person is committed, really deeply committed to higher knowledge. I can hardly think of the negative of Pluto in the ninth. Maybe there's some experiences. The ninth house is the father in the Hindu, not in the West, but in the Hindu it is. Maybe there's something with the father if Pluto's in the ninth. I don't know.
Okay.
When I was updating my book, the Ancient Hindu Astrology, the 2020 version, I was saying that there's no one astrologer is going to have a handle on every planet in every house. Pluto in the 10th.
Right.
So
And
Pluto in
as
the 10th.
we embark on Pluto in the 10th, Pluto is actually moving according to the sidereal astrology. It is moving, it has just moved into the 10th house, the sign of Capricorn, and we can well see its functioning with the economy.
This is the economics, the pandemic. So let me say this. I was saying how Pluto in the ninth, how bad can it be? When Pluto went into Sagittarius, now this was, I believe, it was in the Western tropical. When it went into that sign, that was the O.J. Simpson case. Pluto went into the sign of the law, and we had this O.J. Simpson case where everybody knew he was guilty and he got off, which had happened to white people. It happened to wealthy white people thousands of times, but here is happening to somebody with a different color. It's a big problem. But that was a Pluto.
Moving into a ninth house.
That was a negative Pluto experience there.
Right.
Yeah.
So as it moves into the 10th house, James, we are all very interested in the 10th house.
Pluto in the 10th. Okay. So when Pluto goes into the 10th house, I tell people, this is when you want to do whatever it is that you've always wanted to do in the career, your biggest goal, your biggest dream. And if you've ever had any desires to heal the world, not just to heal individuals, but the 10th house is the public. If you've ever had a desire to heal the public, now is the time when Pluto goes into the 10th. Now, that can also be something transformative with the father. That's a possibility. Pluto in the 10th house can indicate fame, or it can indicate huge problems. So you'll be looking at the rest of the chart to see how the person's career is, the Dasamsha chart, 10th house, the natal 10th house, all of that. And then if Pluto is in that 10th, it's either going to be on the extreme negative or extreme positive. Pluto in the 10th is very often a parent, a father that is manipulative, domineering, pushy, intense. It can be that easily. But if the 10th house is good, then the father is famous and, powerful like that. But so wherever Pluto is going to be usually your most intense experiences. So if you have Pluto in the 10th house, career is extremely important and it's very intense. But it can be, again, Pluto in the 10th could be you're born, your father's not around, you can't get a hold of him. That it could be that too.
Fits like the T to the last T, in a chart that I know.
Yep.
Okay. So Pluto moving into the 11th house for somebody, or being in the 11th.
So when Pluto goes into the 11th, then you're going to have some intense experiences with friends and groups. And you're going to get friends now who are spiritual, friends that are powerful. And if you have Pluto in the 11th house, you have famous friends, you have powerful friends. If you have Pluto in the 11th, your friends are not going to be lighthearted. First of all, the area of friends and groups is going to be very important and very intense. And those friends can be very powerful or special, like that. If the 11th house is bad in the natal chart, there could be some, eldest sibling that died or something like that. But the death and rebirth, the transformation, the growth experiences with friends and groups is likely to be very, very powerful. And there could be some intense growth experiences with eldest sibling. That's a possibility too. Okay. But if you have Pluto in the 11th house, you're going to want group activity. You're not going to want to ignore that. It's going to be important.
So you are, and maybe probably that group activity, as you said, it's intense, it teaches you, and it also hurts you and makes you grow, right?
Yeah. Always think, I should have brought my tarot cards to hold up the card of the Fool.
Oh, I have them. I love the
Fool. The Fool card in my deck is like a hobo. I don't know. Is the word hobo? Yes, it's like he's got almost no clothing on. He has a long stick, and on the end of the stick is like a little bag with a little bit of clothing, and he's walking around. So this is either a total fool going out in the world with no belongings, or it's somebody who has so much inner power. They don't need anything. It's both.
Okay, so finally, as you're talking about somebody going to the world with no belonging, or somebody who's just so powerful in
they don't need anything.
Yes, so that's the 12th house. So that's the 12th house. So how do we say?
No, wait. That's Pluto. Pluto is like the Fool. Yeah, the 12th house. Pluto in the 12th house. This is probably a Western interpretation, but it's the most essential that I can tell you about Pluto in the 12th. The first house is the personality, everything that manifests in the world. The 12th house is everything that is in the subconscious mind. It's everything inside the person, but hidden from view. So Pluto in the 12th house is likely to be a person who has so much intensity going on that they don't even, it's truly subconscious. It means they don't know what the problem is. I'm going to tell you about my brother. When my brother, one of my brothers, when he was, I must have been, I don't know, 5 or 6 or something. He was 8 or 9, 7 or 8. He's probably 7 or 8. No, I was 3 or 4 and he was 6. He was 6 or 7. He had a year where he was just enraged. Nobody knew what he was angry about. Nobody had a clue. I mean, if you took him to a therapist, they would say, well, look at your home life, look at what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. But here was a kid, he couldn't express what the problem was, but inside there was just enormous stuff going on in the subconscious mind. That will occur for anybody with Pluto in the 12th house. Not that they get enraged, but there's going to be an awful lot that is inside, that they're not aware of, that is having an impact on their life. It just creates an extremely intense psychological inner life. Now it can, of course, be, on the positive side, it can be very good for the spiritual. It can be where the person is absolutely committed to moksha, enlightenment. This is different. Pluto going through the 9th house does not necessarily help you at all with moksha. It doesn't. Now, you might meet some gurus who give you some good information about moksha when Pluto's in the 9th, but your concern around that time is more about the guru and the knowledge and all that. When Pluto goes through the 12th house, the concern is now about moksha, enlightenment. And if Pluto is in the 12th house natally, the concern is going to be about freedom, nirvana, the kingdom of heaven within, that which cannot be cut by the sword, burned by fire, blown by wind, or drowned by water. It's like that.
It's been a beautiful journey, just seeing through Pluto in different houses, and as James put it for Pluto, it has been intense. I would put the same word for this entire session also. It has been an intense session.
Yeah. And you're getting you're getting this from a Pluto person.
Nothing better.
Now, I want to mention this. The best book on Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto that I know of is the one by Stephen Arroyo, and it's called Astrology, Karma, and Transformation.
Could you please repeat it once again for our viewers?
Yeah. It's by Stephen Arroyo, Arroyo, and it's called Astrology, Karma, and Transformation. When Isabel Hickey wrote what I considered the best book on Western astrology, at least up till that time. I still like it the best. It's called Astrology, A Cosmic Science. When she wrote that book, she didn't include Pluto. She said, I don't know enough about it yet. You know, she was older, and when was it discovered? 1930 or something. But eventually, a few years later, she wrote a pamphlet on Pluto. I don't know if it's still available or not, but that's she has she did write one.
Right. And that brings us to the end of this session. Please do stay tuned for our Neptune session coming up pretty soon. Thank you so much, James, for this wonderful session. Thank you so much.